began as an ordinary day in the life of a president, John F. Kennedy, with his wife Jacqueline and his vice president Lyndon Johnson on a political visit to Texas. Democratic Party business. There were the usual cheering crowds, a few expectable notes of dissent. In conservative Dallas, liberal Jack Kennedy was not everybody's hero. November 22nd, 1963. The story of this day has been told again and again, but the story has changed. Secrets have been revealed. Witnesses have emerged.
This guy, Leopoldo, insisted that the American had said that we Cubans should have shot President Kennedy after Bay of Pigs, that we didn't have any guts, and that we should do something like that. So immediately I realized that there was an assassination idea or plot.
It was a question of how and when, not a question of whether he had doubts as to the necessity of eliminating at least Mr. Bobby Kennedy.
And possibly his brother also.
And possibly his brother also.
Were you ever offered money to assassinate President Kennedy?
Directly, on numerous occasions.
With the president's host, Texas Governor Conley, riding in the jump seat in front of him, the motorcade will make its fateful turn into Dealey Plaza, past a warehouse called the Texas School Book Depository. At a mere 11 miles per hour, the president's car is a slow-moving target. An ordinary day turns into one of history's nightmares.
It appears as though something has happened in the motorcade route. There has been a shooting. I repeat, a shooting in the motorcade in the downtown area. The president's car is now going past me. Now traveling at a very high rate of speed, Secret Service men standing up in the limousine. They are armed with submachine guns. You see Mrs. Kennedy's pink suit. There's a Secret Service man, spread eagle over the top of the car. At this point, it looks as though it could have been one or two or even all of the people within the car may have been the victims, may have been struck by shots. We don't know. Parkland Hospital has been advised to stand by for a severe gunshot wound.
And just now we've received reports here at Parkland that Governor Connolly was shot in the upper left chest, and the first unconfirmed reports say the president was hit in the head. That's an unconfirmed report that the president was hit in the head.
It was definitely the president's testimony. We have a bulletin coming in. We now switch directly to Parkland Hospital.
The President of the United States is dead. President Kennedy has been assassinated. It's official now. The President is dead.
What? 15 minutes after that shattering announcement, less than 90 minutes after the shooting, Dallas police made an arrest. The suspect was Lee Harvey Oswald, 24, a new employee of the book depository with some curious facts in his background. He had just killed a policeman while on the run from Dealey Plaza.
I really don't know what the situation is about. Nobody has told me anything except that I'm accused of murdering a policeman. I know nothing more than that, and I do request for someone to come forward to give me a legal assistance.
Did you kill the president?
No, I've not been charged with that. In fact, nobody has said that to me yet. The first thing I heard about it was when the newspaper reporters in the hall asked me that question.
The murder weapon, an Italian-made rifle, had already been found near a 6th-floor window of the book depository. Oswald's palm print would be found on the gun. It would later be identified as one he had bought months before from a Chicago mail-order company.
Without any doubt, he's the killer. The law says beyond a reasonable doubt and to a moral certainty, which there's no question that he was the killer of President Kennedy.
I'm just a patsy.
I'm just a patsy, Oswald protested. But the Oswald case would be filed as a case of a lone assassin. There was no sign of any mastermind or accomplice. No sign until years later, when history re-examined the facts, and Oswald would be described quite differently in an official government report as the trigger man in a conspiracy to assassinate President John F. Kennedy. In the 12 hours of grilling by the Dallas police, Lee Harvey Oswald never named an accomplice, never even admitted shooting the president. If there ever was a chance that he would tell a different story, it ended less than 48 hours later as he was being transferred from the city lockup to the county jail. It ended with incredible violence in full view of a national television audience.
Do you have anything to say in your defense? Oswald has been shot.
The suspect's name is Jack Rubenstein, I believe. He goes by the name of Jack Ruby.
Jack Ruby, a character out of the sleazy Dallas underworld of strippers and hookers, bookies and dealers. His story would eventually prove as hokey as it sounds. He said he killed Oswald in a frenzy of grief and sympathy to spare the president's widow the pain of returning to Dallas for a trial. There was no waking up from this nightmare. Perhaps 250 people had witnessed the event in Dealey Plaza. An entire stunned nation was caught up in its aftermath. The massive solemnity of these rites made it all the harder to accept that a vigorous young leader had been brought down by a lone nobody without a motive. Surely so great an event could not be explained by so pathetic a cause. Fears of involvement by some foreign enemy were so strong at first that the new president had flown back from Texas on a zigzag course, and nuclear bombers had been put into the air on alert. Wild rumors circulated, some even implicating LBJ himself. To steady the shaken nation, he enlisted Chief Justice Earl Warren as head of a blue ribbon panel. Distinguished public officials, senior members of Congress, including a future president, Gerald Ford. After 10 months, the Warren Commission delivered its foregone conclusion. There were no lurking conspirators, foreign or domestic. Oswald had acted alone. The verdict stood up for more than a decade, but finally...
I think the Warren Commission has, in fact, collapsed like a house of cards, and I believe that the Warren Commission was set up at the time to feed pablum to the American people.
Republican Richard Schweiker, then a senator, later a member of Ronald Reagan's cabinet, was one of a growing number of informed doubters. The trouble with the Warren Commission was that it did not investigate the Kennedy murder. It merely took what evidence was put before it by the CIA and the FBI. Both these agencies had secrets of their own to protect, sensitive ones, and Jack Kennedy was no great loss to FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. His main concern was to cover his precious bureau for its failure to spot Lee Harvey Oswald as a menace. Washington in the late 1970s. Washington post-Watergate. In a series of congressional investigations, the lid came off. Those buried secrets of the FBI and the CIA came spilling out. Secrets of the Kennedy years, which were now declassified or partly declassified. They identified enemies of the much-admired president, forces connected to the two gunmen who fired the fatal shots in Dallas. The man who commissioned the Warren Report never really believed in its findings, Privately, Lyndon Johnson called Oswald a mysterious fellow and referred to others who could have been involved. Who was Lee Harvey Oswald? A ninth-grade dropout who liked to use big words. A self-taught Marxist, but not quite the non-entity of the Warren Report. He was a Southern boy from a poor family. His father was dead. The uncle who helped raise him was a bookie with connections to the powerful New Orleans underworld. Oswald at 17. Jobless and apparently aimless, he joins the Marines, is shipped overseas to Japan, to Atsugi Air Base, from which the United States is then secretly operating reconnaissance flights over communist China, missions flown by the U-2 spy plane. Oswald's job on the airbase, radar operator. In his spare time, he studies Russian, acquires a reputation in his outfit for left-wing opinions. 1959, age 20. With a family hardship discharge from the service, he uses his savings to buy passage to Russia. At the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, he announces his intentions to become a Soviet citizen and turn over radar secrets to the Russians. There is no evidence he did. The Russians let him stay only after he attempts suicide and give him a job in a radio factory in the city of Minsk. He hates the endless political lectures. He joins a rifle club, goes to dances. Meets and promptly marries Marina Prusakova, a rebellious Russian teenager who left home to live with an uncle, an officer in the security police. 1962. After 3 years in Russia, Oswald gets permission to undefect with his bride. There are no utopias, he has decided. Back home, Oswald took up a lifestyle best described as urban poor white. He drifted between Dallas, Fort Worth, and his hometown, New Orleans. Installed his family in a sequence of seedy neighborhoods. Worked in a succession of nothing jobs, like one as a maintenance man for this New Orleans coffee company. He was less of a breadwinner than a political activist, handing out pamphlets on street corners. His cause was Cuba and its Marxist revolution. Cuba, one of the fateful themes in the career of John F. Kennedy. Cuba had been a thorn in the side of the Kennedy administration almost from the day it took office in 1961, at a time when the revolution was turning left under its charismatic leader, Fidel Castro. An anti-Castro movement based in Florida spent its hopes on an amphibious invasion. The Bay of Pigs fiasco. Practically the entire brigade, more than 1,200 men, were taken prisoner. Their sponsor, Uncle Sam, symbolized by the young American president, was established in Havana as public enemy #1.
Castro and his fellow dictators may rule nations, they do not rule people.
Among Castro's sworn enemies, the veterans of the Bay of Pigs, there were many who also considered the president their enemy. Ransomed from the Cuban POW camps, they were assembled in a Miami stadium with fellow exiles to hear the president make a promise that could only prove empty.
I can assure you that this flag will be returned to this brigade in a free Havana.
For all the inspiring rhetoric, there would be no early return to a free Havana. Kennedy had declined to back up the Bay of Pigs invasion with American air power. Guerrilla bases were gradually being closed down, and Castro had been assured there would be no American invasion. The Cuban exiles felt betrayed. One of the American instructors was an ex-Marine named Jerry Hemming. He worked with some of the most violent anti-Castro militants, anti-Castro and now anti-Kennedy.
Were you ever offered money to assassinate President Kennedy?
Directly, on numerous occasions. In our activities, seeking support for the Cuban exiles. We encountered people from most of the what we'd call a varied political spectrum. The majority of them right-wingers, conservatives, anti-communists. Within these elements, groups of people, there were quite a few very outspoken. As relationships developed and as time went on, some of them very pointedly made statements as to how to resolve the communist menace, how to resolve Castro. Quite often it would boil down to, why are we wasting our time trying to get Castro? Why don't we go to the root of the problem and eliminate the communists in Washington, the number one man, JFK?
In the secret files of the 1960s, there are two apparent clues to the fate of John F. Kennedy. One clue is Cuba. The other is organized crime, the mafia. Unknown to Kennedy, these two explosive elements had been brought together in a plot to get rid of Fidel Castro. A plot developed, again by the CIA, in mafia hangouts like Miami. This was the secret the CIA was protecting from the Warren Commission. If we had known about it, a commission counsel said years later, we would have had a completely different perspective on the assassination. The CIA Mafia plot. Keep these names in mind. A CIA consultant, Las Vegas operator Robert Mayhew, was delegated to make connections with the Mafia. He contacted Johnny Rosselli, a Vegas mob leader, who recruited Sam Giancana of Chicago. Giancana rounded out the deal with Santos Trafficante, a Florida boss with Havana connections.
We checked into a private suite that was occupied by Mr. John Rosselli of Los Angeles and Vegas, and Sam Giancana from Chicago.
Present at one of the first meetings in Miami was a man who chooses to call himself Dr. Peters.
Now, as this conversation developed, I learned that Mayhew, through the CIA, had a contract to have Castro killed. The method to be used was a liquid, little bottle that was to be administered in his food, and it wouldn't take effect for 2 or 3 days. If it would make the person ill, but it would take 2 or 3 days to kill him. But then an autopsy would not show the poison.
So why did the CIA need to go to the mafia?
They had no other way of getting to people in Cuba. You had to have some individual or somebody that knew a lot of Cubans and knew the type of Cubans that could be prevailed upon to get into such a plot.
Who would those contacts in Havana
Well,
be?
The main contact would have been Santos Trafficante.
Santos Trafficante was a man who had much to gain from a plot to get rid of Castro. Before the revolution, under a corrupt dictatorship, Havana had been one of the liveliest capitals of organized crime, Trafficante one of its prosperous bosses. $100 million a year was milked from the tourist hotels with their lucrative sidelines, gambling, prostitution, and drugs. Castro and his Marxist revolution changed all that. Within 18 months, the hotels were deserted. The gambling casinos were nationalized. Trafficante wound up doing time in prison before he managed to get out of Cuba. Now, from his exile in Florida, Trafficante could envision the CIA plot as a way to get back into Havana. His mafia colleagues saw it as a way to earn points with the U.S. government, as protection against future prosecutions by the feds. Instead, they found themselves the targets of a tough new anti-crime campaign by Jack Kennedy and his brother Robert. It was a carryover from Jack's career in the Senate on a committee investigating James Hoffa's Teamsters Union and its links with organized crime.
In fact, this is a strike-breaking, union-busting bill, in my opinion.
Mr. Hoffa, this bill is not a strike-breaking, union-busting bill.
You're the best argument I know for it. Your testimony here this afternoon, your complete indifference to the fact that numerous people who hold responsible positions in your union come before this committee and take the Fifth Amendment because an honest answer might tend to incriminate them.
Jimmy Hoffa became an obsession to Jack's brother Bobby, the committee counsel. Bobby became Hoffa's nemesis. Threats against Jack were reported.
While leaving the hearings after these people had testified regarding this matter, did you say that SOB, I'll break his back?
Who?
You.
Say to who?
To anyone. Did you make that statement after these people testified before the committee?
I never talked to either one of them after testifying.
No, I'm not talking about to them. Did you make that statement here in the hearing room after the testimony was finished?
Not concerning them, far as I know of.
Well, who did you make it about?
I don't know. I may have been discussing somebody in the figure of speech.
Well, who did you make the statement? Whose back were you going to break?
I don't even remember it.
Well, whose back were you going to break, Mr. Hoffa?
Figure of speech, I don't even know who I was talking about, and I don't know what you're talking about.
With Jack Kennedy in the White House and Bobby his Attorney General, the crusade against Hoffa expanded into the greatest anti-crime program ever undertaken by the federal government. In 3 years, organized crime convictions increased from 35 to 160. In the same period, the number of mafia people targeted for prosecution rose from 40 to 2,300. Sam Giancana, the Chicago link in the CIA mafia plot against Castro, was one of the big fish caught in the dragnet. The feds put a severe crimp in his gambling operations. Even bigger, the Kennedys' favorite racket figure, Jimmy Hoffa. Hounded by Robert Kennedy through a series of trials, he eventually went to prison, beaten and humiliated by his arch-antagonist. The cases against Hoffa and his mafia partners were built on a program of electronic surveillance, which gave the government access to the inner circles of organized crime and its allies, in their homes and their cars, in hotel rooms and offices. A systematic program of bugging and wiretapping. It was massive, effective, and also illegal. This was the FBI's dirty little secret of the 60s. When Hoffa discussed some especially nasty business with an associate named Edward Parton, Federal Agent Hawk Daniels was listening in.
I learned in 1962 that Mr. Parton had been entrusted with the mission of securing plastic explosives to be used in either blowing up Mr. Bobby Kennedy, then the U.S. Attorney General, in his automobile or in his home.
Did you learn anything that backed that up from your own personal experience?
Yes, there were 2 telephone calls that were monitored by me. The calls originated with Mr. Parton and terminated with Mr. Hoffa on the other end of the line. Mr. Parton discussed as briefly as possible, being cut off by Mr. Hoffa, that he had obtained the plastic explosive that Mr. Hoffa was seeking.
Do you consider that Mr. Hoffa's hatred or motive for murder was directed against the Kennedys in general?
Yes, I do.
And could also have been directed against the president?
Yes, I believe that.
Were there close links between Hoffa and the leaders of organized crime?
Those who are purportedly members of organized crime, such as Mr. Carlos Marcella of New Orleans, was closely linked to Mr. Hoffa, according to what Mr. Hoffa told me in 1964.
Was he capable of carrying out his threats?
I think that he fully intended to carry the threats out. I really think that he had the capability. It was a question of how and when, not a question of whether he had doubts as to the necessity of eliminating at least Mr. Bobby Kennedy.
And possibly his brother also.
And possibly his brother also.
The territory of Hoffa's mafia associate, Carlos Marcello, was based here in New Orleans, where Lee Harvey Oswald had his roots, and extended down through Dallas, where Jack Ruby operated. Marcello was one of those organized crime figures who had refused to talk to Jack Kennedy's Senate committee.
Of government to keep unionization out of Jefferson Parish?
I decline to answer on the ground of mere intending crimination.
Now, according to the information that we have, you are an associate of Mr. Frank Costello, is that right?
I decline to answer on the same ground.
The Kennedy administration not only hit Marcello with almost $1 million in tax liens, but they also strong-armed him out of the country, dumped him on a mountain road in Guatemala without even a suitcase. He managed to get back into the country, humiliated and vengeful. In September 1962, Marcello called a business meeting at a hunting lodge outside New Orleans. The subject matter is recalled by one of those who attended.
Bobby, to him, represented what the citizens like to think it was a stone in his shoe, a place where it hurts the most, and he blazed out, "Levarse una petra de la scarpa," which means take the stone out of my shoe. And of course, this is a reflection of the bitterness that was within Carlos Marcello, and my informant heard him say very distinctly that in order to do away with Bobby, you had to get rid of the President of the United States, and that you had to find a nut who would be capable of assassinating the President. Carlos said, if you cut the head off a rooster, the tail falls off. And this was the reason he gave for going for the President, Jack Kennedy, instead of Bobby Kennedy.
That was no isolated threat. At just about the same time, at a small hotel in Miami Beach, two men met to discuss a big business deal. One was a wealthy Cuban exile named Jose Aleman. He was looking to borrow $1.5 million for a business investment. The other was the former Havana boss, Santos Traficante, who said he could get it for him from Jimmy Hoffa's Teamsters Union. Jimmy, he said, had okayed it personally. Traficante referred to Bobby Kennedy's current campaign against Hoffa. "Mark my words," he said, "this man Kennedy is in trouble, and he'll get what's coming to him." Aleman reminded him that Bobby's brother, Jack, was likely to be reelected. Traficante responded, "No, Jose, he is going to be hit." New Orleans. In 1963, this mafia base was also a center of Cuban exile activity. When Oswald came here that spring, he moved in for a while with his uncle, the bookie, whose operation was in effect a mafia franchise. On the political front, Oswald the Marxist offered his services, astonishingly, to this man, an anti-Castro activist named Carlos Brignier.
He was claiming that he was anti-Castro, that he had experience in guerrilla warfare and training in the Marines, and that he was willing to train Cubans to fight against Castro.
2 days later, Brignier was outraged to see Oswald handing out pro-Castro leaflets.
I encountered him with the sign "Viva Castro" and "Hands Off Cuba." "Viva Fidel" was this reading of the sign.
Viva Fidel.
Viva Fidel. And I was surprised when it was the same man that has been in my store offering his service to train Cubans.
Oswald continued to play this curious double game. The address he stamped on his pro-Castro leaflets, 544 Camp Street, was a small, seedy building housing little but anti-Castro offices. It was a place, furthermore, where Cuba and the mafia converged. A journalist named William Godet was one of several people who saw him in the company of the building's rather shady tenants.
I do know that I saw him one time with a former, I think he was an FBI agent, a man by the name of Guy Bannister. And Guy, of course, is now dead. What Guy's role was in all of this, I really don't know. But I did see him and discussing various things with Bannister at the time, and I think Bannister knew a whole lot of what was going on.
Guy Bannister, the former FBI man, was now working personally for Carlos Marcello, the mafia boss, and with the Cuban exiles. Oswald was also seen with his associate David Ferry, a rabid anti-communist and a pilot, who flew Marcello back into the country after the Kennedys deported him to Guatemala. Oswald's travels that fall took him from New Orleans to Mexico. In Mexico City, he tried to arrange a return trip to Russia by way of Cuba. No luck. The last stop in his travels would be Dallas. Before he settled in Dallas, he paid a strange, uninvited visit there to this house, the home of a woman named Sylvia Odillo, a well-to-do Cuban exile. Mrs. Odillo recalled the incident in an interview in which she was reluctant to be seen recognizably.
I was visited by a man and two other men, but specifically Lee Harvey Oswald, even though he introduced himself as Leon Harvey Oswald at the time.
You have no doubt at all in your mind, now or then, that this was Lee Harvey Oswald?
Oh, no, not at all. He was Lee Harvey Oswald.
In Mrs. Odillo's living room, Oswald and the two men, both Hispanic, told her they came from New Orleans and asked her to finance certain anti-Castro activities of theirs. She declined. Nevertheless, the next morning she received a phone call from one of the visitors.
It was from Leopoldo, which was a tall guy. And he told me the first thing he said was, "What do you think of the American?" And I said, "Well, I didn't think very much. I didn't make an opinion." He says, "Well, you know, he's kind of loco. Loco means crazy in Spanish, and he's kind of nuts. And he's a Marine, an ex-Marine. He's an expert marksman, and he would be a tremendous asset to anyone, except that he said, you never know how to take him. You know, he can go either way." So I didn't know if he was trying to sell him to me or he was trying to get an opinion from me. See what I mean? So this guy, Leopoldo, insisted that the American had said that we Cubans should have shot President Kennedy after Bay of Pigs, that we didn't have any guts, and that we should do something like that. So immediately I realized that there was an assassination idea or plot.
Mrs. Odillo's story was known to the Warren Commission, but they chose to ignore it. "We're supposed to be closing doors, not opening them," said their counsel. Later investigators, like then Senator Schweiker, would consider her testimony valid and crucial.
If they really were looking for conspiracy or to find out who killed John Kennedy. And the interesting thing is that here was Oswald, who had two associations. One is with Sylvia Odillo, with a group of anti-Castro Cubans, so he was clearly with them and associating with them, who had some motivation. Same time, he was handing out leaflets for the Fair Play for Cuba Committee with the other side of the fence. So the two groups that had the most motivation to assassinate the president, he was dealing with, and we decided not to investigate either avenue. We didn't want to be embarrassed by the Cuban connection.
I still believe that he had nothing to do with Cuba, with Fidel Castro. I still believe that he has something to do with sources within the United States, using perhaps Cubans in this conspiracy. And I still believe that it is a conspiracy.
The Rosetta Stone of the conspiracy, the key to the mystery, is Jack Ruby. So says a recent government investigator. Jack Ruby, whose story of why he shot Oswald turned out to be just an invention of his first lawyer, Tom Howard. When Ruby went to trial in 1964, he passed a note to his new lawyer saying, "Tom Howard told me to say that I shot Oswald so that Mrs. Kennedy wouldn't have to come to Dallas, okay?" The note was unknown to the jury that convicted him, or to the Warren Commission. It turned up some years later. The Warren report found no significant links between Jack Ruby and the Cuban issue, or with organized crime. Wrong on both counts. The file on Ruby includes a phone call to Robert McKeon of Florida, who had an in with Castro.
He wanted to know if he could come down to talk to me about a few things that he wanted to talk about. Getting somebody out of Cuba, if I could help him get him out. I said, well, that's all right, come on down. So I think the next day he came out to the bar where I owned it.
McKeon had another business, running guns.
He was well dressed, he was dressed real nice, you know, and he introduced himself to me, and I said, well, you're the one that called last night. He said, yeah, my name is Ruby, Jack Ruby. And I'd like to go over to Cuba. He said, what if you'd give me a letter of introduction to Castro? I said, no, I wouldn't want to do anything like that. He said, well, I certainly wouldn't make it worth your while to do it. I said, what do you mean worth my while? He said, well, I believe that it'd be worth a lot of money to me. And I said, well, I don't know how much money it'd be worth. I said, but... And so he mentioned $25,000, but to my opinion, that was quite a bit of money. Well, I found out later through friends of mine that he did go to Cuba and he did use my name.
Ruby's man in Havana, the man he went to see there, was an old chum named Louis McWillie. He went not just once, as he told the Warren Commission, but at least 3 times. These declassified FBI documents identify McWillie as a lieutenant of none other than Santos Trafficante, the mafia boss. At the time of Ruby's visit, Trafficante was being held in a Cuban jail. A British journalist who was in the same jail is quoted in a CIA cablegram. He said, Trafficante was visited frequently by an American gangster type named Ruby. Trafficante was apparently the man Ruby wanted to get out of Cuba. At any rate, not long afterwards, Trafficante did get out, in time to join the CIA plot against Castro. Ruby's connections with organized crime went back to his young punk days in Chicago when he was a runner for Al Capone. In 1939, he was questioned in connection with the murder of a union boss. Ruby, then Rubenstein, was the union secretary. In Robert Kennedy's book on the underworld, this murder is called a key event leading to mafia domination of the Teamsters Union. After Chicago, Dallas, where Ruby operated strip joints. FBI and police reports also connect him with gambling, prostitution, and drugs. In the fall of 1963, Ruby made an unusual number of long-distance calls to associates of Johnny Rosselli in Las Vegas, Sam Giancana in Chicago, and Carlos Marcello in New Orleans. In November, there was a sequence of lengthy phone conversations with Barney Baker, an aide to Jimmy Hoffa. That was shortly before President Kennedy's nightmare visit to Dallas.
The committee will come to order.
Washington, 1976. 13 years after John F. Kennedy was shot. With the Warren Report undermined by post-Watergate revelations, Congress finally launches an investigation of its own by a select committee on assassinations. It would grind on for more than 2 years, the most exhaustive, most expensive in American history. Unlike the Warren Commission, this panel was equipped with an investigating staff of its own, would not be captives of the FBI and the CIA. 13 years of accumulated evidence, rumors, wild theories, flimsy leads, all would be checked out by investigators doubling back over ground covered years before, and sometimes breaking new ground. In volumes of testimony, the committee disposed of some persistent theories that Oswald was in the pay of the Russians, the FBI, the CIA. In each case, there were valid grounds for suspicion, but also valid explanations. Oswald as an agent of the Cuban government? Killing Kennedy would only have invited an American invasion. As Castro said, it would have been useless as well as insane.
Why? Because we do not believe that the system is abolished by liquidating the leaders. It is the system that we opposed, the reactionary ideas, not the men. Our reaction to the assassination was one of grief, because it seemed to us a painful, tragic way for Kennedy's life to end.
The death of John F. Kennedy was reconstructed in painful detail when the Assassinations Committee made its final report. He was killed, they determined, by 2 shots fired from the book depository window. Fired by Lee Harvey Oswald, A third shot missed. There was some evidence of a fourth shot found by acoustical experts on a police recording of events in Dealey Plaza. It came, supposedly, from a different direction, indicating a second gunman. The evidence is vigorously disputed by other experts. But there was a second gunman, if not in Dealey Plaza, then in the Dallas police station.
Do you have anything to say in your defense? Oswald has been shot.
Jack Ruby's murder of Oswald, the committee said, had all the earmarks of a gangland rub-out. Ruby had lied about his motive. He lied about his visits to Cuba. And he had stalked Oswald for 2 days before slipping into the police station and pulling the trigger. Oswald and Ruby, this report concludes, were separate instruments in a conspiracy to assassinate President Kennedy.
The committee believes that President Kennedy was probably assassinated as the result of a conspiracy. Members of organized crime may have been involved in the plot. Members of anti-Castro Cuban groups may also have been involved.
Who were the prime suspects?
The whole truth and nothing but the truth, as you shall answer unto God. Thank you. You may be seated.
Santos Traficante is called to testify before the Assassinations Committee. They ask him, did you ever discuss plans to assassinate President Kennedy? Did you know Jack Ruby? While you were in prison in Cuba, were you visited by Jack Ruby? At the request of Traficante's lawyer, who also incidentally represented Carlos Marcello, the television cameras are ordered out of the committee room. Traficante then replies to all 3 questions. I respectfully refuse to answer, pursuant to my rights under the 1st, 4th, 5th, and 14th Amendments. Another mafioso, Johnny Rosselli, did talk, putting the finger on his colleagues in the CIA plot, particularly Traficante. 2 months after his secret testimony, Rosselli's mutilated body was found floating in the waters off Miami, stuffed in an oil drum. His colleague, Sam Giancana, had been murdered previously before he could testify to another committee on the CIA plot against Castro. Silenced, perhaps because the plot led to other things.
Somebody didn't want Sam to testify, and all Sam was going to say, I gave a contact to Santos. Period. I don't know anything more about it.
Santos Traficante.
That would have been the headline.
Was there anything about the way they were killed that indicated?
Well, in Sam's case, the shooting, placing the bullets around the mouth, which is a mob's way of saying, keep your mouth shut, seal his lips. It's an old mob method to warn others not to talk.
Who wanted to stop Johnny Rosselli talking?
Well, it'd be my opinion that there's only one man that had most to lose. I don't want to name him because I have no proof.
Jimmy Hoffa had the means, the motive, and the connections to get rid of Jack Kennedy. But the committee could go no farther than that. Hoffa, of course, had disappeared after returning from prison. A lengthy search for his body proved useless. He is presumed to have been a victim of the alliance between his own union and the mob. Jack Ruby died in prison in 1967 while awaiting a retrial on appeal. He had told a visitor, They're going to find out about Cuba. They're going to find out about the guns, about New Orleans, about everything. Ruby gave one last interview to a local TV reporter. It was crudely recorded, but tantalizing.
The only thing I can say, what is your name, and I'll know how to address you. Harry Kendall. Harry Kendall. Everything pertaining to what's happening has never come to the surface. The world will never know the true facts of what occurred, my motives. In other words, I'm the only person in the background that knows the truth pertaining to everything relating to my circumstances.
Do you think it'll ever come out?
No, because unfortunately, the people that have so much to gain and have such an ulterior motive for putting me in a position I'm in will never let the true facts come above board to the world.
Now, these people are in very high positions, Jack?
Yes.
Jack Kennedy was haunted by the poignancy of dying young. His favorite poem was, "I Have a Rendezvous with Death." His death is an incomplete story. The conspiracy report was an explanation, not a case. It was issued in 1979, and by then the trail was cold as Kennedy's grave. No evidence was ever presented in court, no suspect ever indicted. The story of the conspiracy to assassinate President Kennedy serves nothing but history. History, like humanity, needs to have its nightmares explained.